Good kids don't happen by accident. They're shaped by what we expect, what we allow, and what we choose to correct. Welcome to Good Kids Don't Happen by Accident, the podcast about raising accountable kids in a world full of excuses. I'm your host, Coach Steve. Today, I want to start off by asking you a question. When was the last time you looked your child in the eye and simply said, I was wrong? Not because somebody made you, not because your spouse convinced you to, but because after you thought about what happened, you realized you were wrong. After all my years of teaching and raising two wonderful boys, I learned something. And I know I said this before, but it's worth repeating. Children don't need perfect parents. They need honest parents. And sometimes, the most powerful words a parent can ever say are, I was wrong. Let me tell you a story. It's about how I learned this lesson the hard way. One afternoon, my son came home from school and walked in the house, and I was standing waiting for him. Before he could even get his little backpack off his shoulder, I said, Son, you go to your room. I don't want to see you or talk to you until I have a few minutes to calm down. Do you know I got a call today at work from your principal? And I'm so upset and embarrassed by the poor choices you made. Here's what happened. The principal called me earlier that day. He told me that our son had made fun of him online by posting pictures to the school website of him with silly captions, and that they were inappropriate and not funny, and my son would be punished accordingly. Well, as both a parent and a teacher, I was embarrassed. I apologized to the principal. I promised we would talk to our son at home and it would never happen again. Well, the first mistake I made was when my son walked through the door, I never gave him a chance to explain. He tried. He kept saying, Dad, it wasn't me, Dad. And I just interrupted him. Because with me being a teacher and my wife being a teacher, do you know how many times we heard kids say, it wasn't me? And 99% of the time, it was them. But sadly, when my son said it, I didn't give him a chance, and I didn't even listen. Turns out, it wasn't him. The principal mixed up some boys. There were 4 kids that year in my son's class, all with the same first name. My son was telling me the truth the whole time. The kid didn't do anything wrong, and I felt terrible for not listening. I felt so small. As soon as I hung up the phone from the principal when I found out what happened, I went to his room and I sat down. I said, Buddy, I'm so sorry and I owe you a very sincere apology. Look, Mom and Dad are both teachers, and we hear kids say, it wasn't me almost every day. But as your dad, I'm embarrassed I didn't listen to you. I should have let you talk before I just assumed you were guilty. And then I said those 3 words that every parent should be willing to say. I was wrong. And you know, something interesting happened after that. My son didn't lose respect for me. If anything, our relationship grew stronger. Because children don't expect us to be perfect. They expect us to be honest with them. When we admit our mistakes, we give them permission to admit theirs. And humility doesn't weaken our authority as parents. It strengthens it. Several years later, I learned that lesson again. I was sitting home one evening and I'm checking my email like I did every night, and one popped up. The email that no teacher wants to read at 9 o'clock at night. It was from an upset mom, a very upset mom. She wanted a meeting with me and the principal first thing tomorrow morning. She believed that I embarrassed her daughter in front of the whole class. And rightfully so. If I was in her shoes, I'd be upset too. But my heart sank because I knew I didn't do anything wrong. I called her immediately, and as I spoke to her, I realized what had happened. It wasn't that I tried to embarrass her daughter. It was that something I had said was heard very differently than I intended. So I walked the mom through exactly what had happened and word for word what I said. And then I told the mom something that I meant with all my heart. I said, Ma'am, I would never, ever intentionally say anything that would embarrass one of my students. I know it's a new year and you don't know me yet, but my teaching philosophy, something I spent my entire career is trying to build children up, not tear them down. It's the last thing I would ever want a child to feel when they walked into my classroom was embarrassed. And then I said, "Do you trust me to make it right?" The next morning, I met her daughter at the classroom door. This kid was always the first one to arrive. And I apologized to her for the misunderstanding. I told her how sorry I was that my words were interpreted differently than what I intended. And then I told that kid the same thing I told her mom the night before. I said, "Honey, I would never intentionally embarrass one of my students, especially you. You're a great kid. My job as your teacher is to build you up, not tear you down. I would never, ever, ever in a million years want you to feel embarrassed in my classroom." And then I asked her something. I said, "Hey, would you be okay if I apologized to the whole class again and let them know what happened?" And she smiled and said, "Sure, coach." So when all the kids arrived that morning, I had everybody sit on the floor. We held our little weekly class meetings and did our read aloud together. And I said, "Class, I want to apologize to all of you. Yesterday something happened. I said something in math class that was interpreted very differently than I intended. And one of our classmates left school feeling embarrassed. And that was never my intention. And I want all of you to know I am truly sorry. You guys have to understand that sometimes adults say something and children hear it very differently than what we meant. And that's what happened yesterday." The room was completely quiet. And you know what happened next? We had an incredible year together. Incredible. Today, that girl's all grown up and has become a wonderful young woman. And every time I think about that day, I'm reminded that apologizing didn't weaken our relationship, it strengthened it. Looking back, I'm grateful she gave me the chance to make it right. Because I think that lesson was even more valuable than the one I taught that day in math class. And that experience reminded me of something I will never forget. Sometimes, the apology matters more than the mistake. Children don't remember what we said. They remember how we treated them when things went wrong. So, what can we learn from this? First, slow down before reacting. That was a tough one for me, especially when emotions are high. Second, listen before you decide, because sometimes our children are telling us the truth. Third, when you make a mistake, own it. Don't explain it away. Don't defend it to your kids, and definitely don't pretend it didn't happen. Simply say, "I was wrong." Those words don't make you a weaker parent. They make you a stronger one. Because your children aren't just listening to what you say. They're learning how to handle mistakes by watching how you handle them. If your kids hear you tell them, "I love you," never stop saying that. If they hear you say, "I'm proud of you," I hope your kids never have to wonder if you mean it. But every once in a while, if you make a mistake, let them hear something else. Those 3 simple words, "I was wrong." Because someday, your child's going to make a mistake. And when that day comes, I hope they won't be afraid to admit it. Not because you told them they should, but because they watched someone they loved do exactly that. Children learn far more from what we model than from what we lecture. Because good kids don't happen by accident. They're built through expectations, encouragement, accountability, and adults who never stop believing in who they can become. Until next time, keep believing in your kids because they're still becoming. Take care.